Julian, Madeline's discharge papers are ready. Are you really not going to walk her out? Outside the VIP room on the top floor of St. Mary's Hospital, the young resident, Mark, hesitated by the door, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside, Dr. Julian Vance, the city's youngest, most celebrated orthopedic surgeon, didn't even raise his head. He was meticulously peeling an apple, slicing it into neat, uniform pieces for the woman propped up in the hospital bed. She had a few broken bones 6 months ago, Julian said, his tone devoid of any warmth. She's fine. Chloe's knee has a severe soft tissue contusion, and her emotional state is unstable. I'm not leaving her side. Tell Madeline to take a cab. Mark swallowed hard, shifting his weight. But Dr. Vance, Madeline suffered multiple compound fractures. She's been hospitalized in your own facility for half a year, and you haven't visited her once. The group chat is already. Already what? Julian cut him off, his brow furrowing with sudden irritation. Saying she got what she deserved. If she hadn't started a petty argument with Chloe in the rain that night, Chloe wouldn't have slipped. Madeline's car accident was her own reckless doing. She brought it on herself the moment she tried to drive Chloe out of town. Just outside the cracked door, Madeline Carter stood in the dim hallway. She wore a simple, faded white dress, holding a single, light duffel bag. Her right leg trembled slightly under her weight, a permanent reminder of her grueling physical therapy. Every word out of Julian's mouth hit her like a physical blow. 180 days. She had undergone 3 major reconstructive surgeries in the very hospital where her husband was the chief orthopedic specialist. She had spent endless nights clutching the bedsheets, shivering from the agony in her shattered bones. And in all that time, her husband hadn't crossed the short distance from the top floor to her ward down below. Because all his tenderness was reserved for Chloe Bennett, whose biggest injury was a minor bruise. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She unlocked it to see her college alumni group chat blowing up with notifications. Word is Madeline's finally getting discharged today. Is anyone going to pick her up? Pick her up. Dr. Vance is spending every waking hour with Chloe Bennett. She forced Dr. Vance into that marriage contract 3 years ago anyway and spent all her time bullying Chloe. Serves her right. Imagine being married to the top orthopedic authority in the city, rotting in his hospital for 6 months, and having him act like you don't exist. She's the biggest joke in our social circle. Madeline stared at the screen until the words blurred. The last embers of warmth in her chest finally turned to ash. 6 years of devotion. 3 years of marriage. She had put her own research career on hold, played the dutiful wife, and cooked his meals every single night. And in return, she got a serves her right. Enough. Madeline pushed the door open. Inside, Julian frowned when he saw her. A flicker of something uncomfortable crossed his face, but it was instantly replaced by his usual cold, condescending detachment. What are you doing here? Julian asked coldly, setting the apple down. Chloe needs her rest. If you're here to throw another scene, I'm calling security to escort you out. On the bed, Chloe shrank back slightly, clutching Julian's sleeve with a fragile, timid expression. Madeline. Please don't blame Julian, Chloe murmured, her voice dripping with artificial innocence. My knee was hurting so badly that I begged him to stay. Please don't fight because of me. A year ago, Madeline would have felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She would have frantically tried to explain herself, begging Julian to look at her, to believe her. Now, looking at the two of them, she felt nothing. Just an overwhelming, hollow absurdness. Madeline walked up to the small table in front of Julian. She reached into her bag, pulled out a document, and slapped it down between them. The bold, black header was unmistakable: divorce settlement agreement. Julian's eyes narrowed. He let out a harsh laugh. Divorce. Is this your new game, Madeline? Threatening me with a divorce just to get my attention? I've already signed it, Madeline said, her voice flat, as if discussing the weather. I'm walking away with nothing. You keep the house, the stock options, and all the assets. You and Chloe can do whatever you want from today on. Julian's face darkened instantly. My patience has limits, Madeline. Don't think for a second I won't sign it. Be my guest, Madeline replied smoothly. She didn't glance at Chloe, nor did she wait for Julian to speak again. She turned on her heel and walked out, her spine straight, her head held high. Even with her faint limp, every step was steady and resolute. Stop acting. Julian snapped, grabbing a pen from his coat and furiously signing his name on the final page. Let's see how long a woman with no family background and no job lasts out there without the Vance name. Down at the main entrance of the hospital, the afternoon sun was blinding. A crowd of nurses, junior doctors, and former classmates had gathered near the glass doors, whispering and waiting to watch Madeline drag her luggage to the street to call a cheap ride share. Madeline stepped out into the heat. Before she could take another step, the deep, guttural roar of high-performance engines echoed down the street. A convoy of sleek, jet-black Maybachs tore around the corner, cutting off traffic and pulling up in a flawless, synchronized line directly in front of the hospital steps. The doors flew open simultaneously. A dozen towering men in tailored black suits stepped out, immediately lining up on both sides of the walkway and bowing in unison. "Welcome home, Miss Carter." The rear door of the center Maybach opened. A tall, commanding figure stepped out into the sunlight. He wore an immaculate bespoke suit, his razor-sharp jawline and striking features radiating an aura of absolute dominance. But as his deep, dark eyes locked onto Madeline, the coldness vanished, replaced by an intense, overwhelming raw emotion. The crowd went dead silent. Several nurses gasped, clutching their chests. It was Alexander Sterling, the ruthless, untouchable head of the global financial and medical conglomerate, Sterling Group. Under the stunned, breathless gazes of everyone present, Alexander walked straight past the crowd and stopped right in front of Madeline. Without a word, he unbuttoned his heavy cashmere overcoat, gently draped it over her frail shoulders, and drew her close. "You kept me waiting 6 months, Madeline," Alexander said, his voice deep, raspy, and laced with an irresistible, possessive warmth. "Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Madeline looked up into his intense gaze, and for the first time in 6 months, a faint, breathtaking smile touched her lips. "Let's go home, Alexander." As the heavy convoy smoothly pulled away into the traffic, leaving behind a crowd of shell-shocked onlookers, Julian finally burst through the hospital doors, holding the signed papers, only to freeze dead in his tracks as he watched the sterling crest disappear around the bend. The plush leather interior of the Maybach smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Alexander sat beside Madeline, his large, warm hand gently cupping her cold fingers. His jaw was set tight, a storm brewing in his dark eyes. "Why didn't you call me 6 months ago?" Alexander asked, his voice low and laced with a suppressed, volatile anger. "If I had known you were rotting in Vance's hospital, being treated like garbage, I would have razed that place to the ground." Madeline looked down at his hand. The warmth seeped into her skin, steady and grounding. "I needed to see it through, Alexander," she said softly. "For 3 years, I thought love meant sacrifice. I gave up my career, my pride, everything, just to play the good wife. I had to let him destroy every last illusion I had before I could walk away. And now..." Alexander turned to face her, his gaze intense, possessive, and unwavering. "Now I'm awake," Madeline replied, a cold, sharp edge entering her tone. "And I want back everything that's mine." "Good." Alexander's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Because the entire Sterling Group is standing right behind you." The following evening, the Grand Ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was packed for the annual Orthopedic Medical Tech Summit. Julian wore a tailored tuxedo, a flute of champagne in hand, as Chloe leaned heavily against his arm. She was wearing a pastel pink gown, her knee wrapped in an ostentatious velvet brace. Around them, a circle of former college classmates and junior doctors laughed and chimed in. "Honestly, Julian, congratulations on finally dumping Madeline," one of the doctors said. "She was just a plain, boring housewife. She didn't fit into your world at all." "Exactly," another classmate added, turning to Chloe with a flattering smile. "Chloe's the real deal, a Bennett family heiress. You two are a match made in heaven." Chloe flushed modestly, hiding her face against Julian's shoulder. "Guys, stop. Madeline just got divorced and she doesn't even have a place to stay. I heard she's been desperately applying for entry-level lab technician jobs. It's actually really sad." Julian took a sip of his champagne, his eyes cold and arrogant. "She brought it on herself. Without me, no respectable medical firm in this city will ever hire her. Give her a week. She'll be crawling back on her knees, begging me to take her in." Just then, the heavy mahogany doors at the entrance swung open. The laughter in the ballroom died down, replaced by a wave of hushed gasps. Madeline stepped into the room. She wore a backless, navy blue silk gown that clung to her curves like night sky, her dark hair swept up to reveal her elegant, swan-like neck. Her makeup was flawless, accentuating her sharp, striking features. She didn't look like a woman who had spent 6 months in a hospital bed, she looked like a queen stepping onto her throne. The classmates' jaws dropped. Is that Madeline? Someone whispered loudly. What the hell? Wasn't she supposedly bedridden and broke? Julian's eyes widened, his heart skipping an involuntary beat. A sudden, suffocating surge of desire and confusion hit him in the chest. She looked breathtaking, far more stunning than she ever had while cooking his dinners at home. Instinctively, Julian pushed through the crowd and blocked her path, his face twisting into a sneer to hide his inner turmoil. Madeline. Who allowed you in here? Julian demanded, looking her up and down. This is an elite medical summit. Did you rent that dress just to sneak in and stalk me? It's pathetic. Chloe limped over, clutching Julian's arm with a look of fake concern. Madeline, tickets for this summit cost $50,000 each. You shouldn't be using unethical methods just to prove a point. Unethical methods. A deep, commanding voice shattered the tension, ringing through the ballroom like a crack of thunder. The crowd parted instantly as Alexander stepped forward. He smoothly slid an arm around Madeline's waist, pulling her close against his side as his glacial gaze swept over Julian and Chloe. The chief advisory scientist of Sterling Group's medical division doesn't need a ticket, Alexander said coldly. She owns the venue. The room erupted into quiet chaos. Chief advisory scientist. Wait, isn't that the anonymous genius who developed the revolutionary biobone matrix patent? That patent is worth billions. You're telling me Madeline is the mind behind it? Julian's face went pale, but he forced a bitter laugh. Chief scientist. Are you out of your mind, Sterling? She's a basic college graduate who spent the last 3 years washing my clothes. You're lying just to save her face. Madeline looked at Julian, her eyes as cold as liquid nitrogen. Julian, do you really think you won that National Orthopedic Innovation Award 3 years ago because of your own talent? Madeline asked, her voice crystal clear. The core algorithms, the clinical trial models, the structural data, I spent months pulling all-nighters in the lab pushing those calculations for you. Julian froze, his throat suddenly going dry. What? What are you talking about? You thought I was just a housewife, Madeline said smoothly. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a thick document wrapped in an official state seal, and tossed it right onto the tray of champagne glasses beside Julian. The top page read, Global Patent Register, Chief Designer, Madeline Carter. Read it and weep, Dr. Vance, Madeline said. The foundational framework for your entire career belongs to me. Julian stared at the bold, black ink of her name, his hands beginning to shake. No. This can't be. You gave those files to me. Before he could process the shock, Alexander stepped closer to Julian, leaning down so only a few people could hear. You took her brilliance for granted, Vance. But to me, she's priceless. In front of the entire elite social circle, Alexander lowered himself slightly, took Madeline's gloved hand, and placed a soft, lingering kiss on her knuckles. Then, he turned to the crowd, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Let me make one thing crystal clear to everyone in this city. From this moment on, anyone who disrespects Madeline Carter is declaring war on the Sterling Group. Have I made myself understood? The ballroom was dead silent. Chloe's fake smile completely crumbled. Julian stood paralyzed, staring at Madeline, the woman he had thrown away like trash, now standing on top of the world, wrapped in the fierce, absolute protection of a man he could never hope to match. And for the very first time, a cold, terrifying claw of regret tore through Julian's chest. The keynote presentations for the Medical Tech Summit began shortly after. On the lit stage, Chloe stood confidently behind the podium, remote in hand, as a glowing slide titled Advanced Stem Cell Bone Matrix Regeneration appeared on the massive LED screen behind her. Over the past 6 months, under the guidance of Dr. Julian Vance, I have independently developed this revolutionary bone repair model, Chloe announced, beaming into the microphone. We are currently preparing to file for international patents. The audience broke into enthusiastic applause. In the second row, Julian sat with his chin held high, shooting a smug glance back toward Madeline, as if saying, this is what a real partner looks like, not a useless ghostwriter. Madeline, sitting in the front row VIP lounge right beside Alexander, folded her arms, a cold, mocking smile playing on her lips. As Chloe clicked to the 14th slide displaying a complex series of chemical equations and fluid dynamics, Madeline raised her hand. Miss Bennett, Madeline's calm, sharp voice cut right through the applause. Chloe paused, her smile faltering slightly. Yes, Madeline. Questions are supposed to be saved for the QA session at the end. On slide 14, you set the third phase discrete factor to 0.04, Madeline interrupted, stepping into the center aisle. Did you perform temperature-controlled stability testing on that variable in a live clinical setting? Chloe's eyes flickered with panic. She clutched the podium, her knuckles turning white. That falls under our proprietary research. I'm not obligated to reveal trade secrets to someone who isn't a board member. Trade secrets. Madeline let out a soft laugh. She pulled a black thumb drive from her evening clutch, walked straight onto the side stage, and plugged it into the master media console. Override display, Madeline ordered the technician. Before the event staff could react, the LED screen behind Chloe flickered and switched. Replacing Chloe's presentation were timestamped, watermarked lab logs from 3 years ago, stamped with the official seal of the National Science Foundation. That equation isn't a trade secret, Chloe. It's an error, Madeline said, her voice echoing through the sound system. It was a flawed draft I discarded 3 years ago because a factor of 0.04 causes rapid bone tissue necrosis within 48 hours. You didn't invent this model. You stole my discarded rough draft, and you didn't even have the basic medical competence to spot the fatal flaw. Gasps erupted across the entire auditorium. Wait, so Chloe's research is completely stolen. And it's a failed draft that kills tissue. My God, she was going to use that on patients. Is she insane? Stargazing as a genius scientist when she's just a fraud. Chloe's face drained of all color. Tears of desperation spilled over her cheeks as she looked frantically toward the front row. Julian. Help me. I didn't. I just grabbed the wrong file from your home office study. You know I worked hard on this. Julian snapped out of his shock and bolted up from his seat, shouting angrily at Madeline. Madeline. That's enough. Chloe is just starting her career. Even if she referenced your old notes, did you really have to humiliate her on live broadcast in front of the entire industry? How can you be so vicious? Vicious. Madeline turned her head, looking at him with utter disgust. Before Julian could take another step toward the stage, Alexander's head of security stepped up and delivered a swift, brutal backhand across Julian's face. Crack. Julian stumbled backward, collapsing onto the carpeted floor, clutching his bleeding lip in shock. Alexander stood up, taking his time to button his suit jacket. He walked over and stood over Julian, looking down at him as if he were a bug beneath his shoe. Calling blatant academic theft referencing old notes. Alexander said, his voice laced with venomous disdain. Dr. Vance, your lack of ethics is astonishing even for a disgraced husband. Madeline walked down from the stage, stopping right beside the sprawling Julian. She handed a formal legal notice to the summit organizers. As the patent holder and chief advisor of Sterling Group, I am officially filing charges against Chloe Bennett for fraud and intellectual property theft, Madeline stated, her tone icy and uncompromising. Furthermore, Sterling Group is immediately pulling all clinical funding and equipment grants from St. Mary's Hospital's orthopedic department. Julian's eyes went wide with pure terror. No. Madeline, you can't do that. My entire research lab relies on those grants. He reached out desperately to grab the hem of her gown, but Alexander's heavy leather shoe slammed down, pinning Julian's wrist firmly against the floor. Julian let out a sharp, pathetic wail of pain as his bones groaned under the pressure. Alexander leaned down, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper meant only for Julian's ears. Remember this pain, Vance. It doesn't even come close to a fraction of what she felt lying in that hospital bed while you ignored her. Alexander let go, took Madeline's hand, and led her toward the exit. Behind them, security guards dragged a sobbing Chloe off the stage while the crowd erupted into a frenzy of cameras and shouting reporters. 2 weeks after the summit scandal, the Bennett family hosted their 80th anniversary gala at the city's most exclusive country club. Despite Chloe's reputation being thoroughly dragged through the dirt over the academic theft, the Bennett family patriarch, Richard Bennett, had insisted on holding the event. Julian had spent every waking hour smoothing things over with Chloe, convinced that securing his place by her side was his only remaining ticket back to the top. Don't worry, Chloe, Julian whispered as they walked into the chandelier-lit ballroom, adjusting his bow tie. Once your grandfather officially announces you as the sole heir to the Bennett empire tonight, all those rumors about the lab draft will fade away. Power rewrites history. Once we have the Bennett backing, we'll crush Madeline. Chloe put on a weak, needy smile, clutching his arm tightly. You're right, Julian. Grandpa loves me. He'd never let anyone take my place. Before Julian could reply, the main doors opened, and the room fell silent. Madeline walked in, leaning lightly on Alexander's arm. She wore a tailored crimson velvet evening suit that radiated effortless elegance and authority. Julian's jaw tightened. He immediately cut across the floor, blocking their path with an arrogant glare. "You really don't know when to quit, do you, Madeline?" Julian sneered, keeping his voice low. "Did you think clinging to Sterling would get you into real old money circles? Tonight is a private Bennett family celebration. You're an outsider, and frankly, you're not welcome." Madeline didn't even slow her pace, looking past him as if he were invisible. "Move, Julian. You're blocking the view. You arrogant." "Quiet," Alexander's cold voice cut Julian off. "Or I'll have my men throw you into the fountain outside." Before Julian could retort, a heavy microphone chime echoed across the hall. Richard Bennett, the gray-haired patriarch of the Bennett family, stood on the main stage, flanked by two family lawyers. "Welcome, everyone," Richard announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight, besides celebrating 80 years of Bennett Enterprises, I have a long-overdue family matter to settle." Chloe puffed out her chest, raising her chin proudly and stepping closer to the stage, ready to take her spotlight. 25 years ago, my daughter gave birth in a regional hospital during a storm," Richard continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Madeline. "Through recent DNA verification and a thorough criminal investigation, we discovered that my newborn granddaughter was deliberately swapped at birth." The crowd erupted into stunned mutters. Chloe's smile froze. Her face drained of all color. "What? What is he talking about?" Richard raised his hand, pointing straight at Madeline. "The true, biological heiress of the Bennett family, my granddaughter, is Madeline Carter. Or rather, Madeline Bennett." Before anyone could process the bombshell, the double doors burst open. Half a dozen uniformed police officers marched straight down the aisle, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. Chloe Bennett, the lead detective, called out, his voice sharp and stern. "You are under arrest for corporate espionage, identity fraud, and conspiratorial grand larceny related to the Bennett family estate." "No. Grandpa, tell them they're wrong," Chloe shrieked, backing away in terror. "I'm your granddaughter. She's an imposter." "The DNA tests don't lie, Chloe," Richard said coldly from the stage. "And neither do the bank records showing you funneled company funds into offshore accounts. Take her away." The police snapped the cuffs around Chloe's wrists and hauled her screaming out of the venue. Julian stood frozen in place, his mind completely blank. His knees buckled, and he barely managed to catch himself against a nearby high-top table. He stared at Madeline in sheer, unadulterated horror. He had spent 3 years treating her like a nobody, a nameless orphan with no money, no connections, and no background. He had cast her aside like garbage to chase Chloe's high society status. And the entire time, Madeline was the actual billionaire heiress. "Madeline." Julian stumbled toward her, his voice trembling violently as panic consumed him. "Madeline, tell me this is a joke. You're a Bennett. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Madeline stopped and turned to look at him, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "Tell you?" Madeline scoffed softly. "Julian, when I married you, I thought you loved me for who I was. I gave you 3 years to prove that you cared about something other than titles and clout. But you only ever cared about what a woman could do for your ego. Madeline, please." Julian grabbed his own hair in desperation, tears of panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "I was tricked. Chloe manipulated me. I love you, Madeline. We're husband and wife." "We were," Madeline interrupted, her tone sharp as a razor. "Now, you're just a disgraced doctor who traded a diamond for a piece of glass." Richard Bennett stepped down from the stage, motioning to the security guards. "Get this pathetic gold digger out of my sight. And notify every board in the state, Julian Vance is officially blacklisted from every Bennett-affiliated hospital and research institution." "No. Madeline. Give me another chance. Madeline." Julian's desperate screams echoed down the corridor as security dragged him out into the night, kicking and pleading like a beggar. Madeline watched him go, completely unbothered, as Alexander took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a firm, protective grip. Life hit rock bottom for Julian with terrifying speed. Stripped of his academic credentials, evicted from his medical lab, and blacklisted by every major hospital network in the city, the once revered orthopedic prodigy was reduced to working graveyard shifts at a struggling, run-down private clinic on the outskirts of town. That rain-slicked Tuesday night, panic erupted in the clinic's emergency bay. An ambulance pulled up, sirens blaring, escorting a high-profile international investor whose luxury SUV had flipped on the highway. The patient's preliminary scans were a nightmare: multiple shattered vertebrae, a crushed femoral head, and sharp bone fragments pinned directly against the thoracic aorta. One wrong twitch, and the patient would bleed out in seconds. The clinic director sprinted into the trauma room, pale as a sheet, clutching the scans. "Vance," the director barked, grabbing Julian by the collar. "You're the only surgeon here with high-level trauma experience. Get in there." Julian stared at the illuminated X-rays, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold his pen. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. I can't touch this," Julian stammered, his voice cracking with pure terror. "The fragments are wrapped around the aorta. The margin of error is less than half a millimeter. If I cut, he dies on my table. I'll end up in prison. If he dies on our table without a fight, this clinic gets shut down tomorrow and we all go to prison." The director yelled back, shaking him. "Isn't there anyone in the world who can handle a micro-reconstruction like this?" "Only one," Julian whispered, a desperate spark igniting in his hollow eyes. "Professor M. The international pioneer of microorthopedic robotics. But nobody knows who M is. They never reveal their face." The director pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. "I have a contact at the International Medical Association. Let me try." 40 frantic minutes later, a heavy silence fell over the operating room. "She agreed," the director gasped, bursting back in. "Professor M happened to be in the city. She's arriving in 5 minutes. Vance, get washed up and assist." Julian collapsed onto his knees in relief, tears of desperation streaming down his face. "Thank God. Thank God. When Professor M gets here, I'll scrub in, I'll hand her the instruments, I'll do whatever she asks. I'll beg her to take me on as an apprentice." Moments later, the heavy double doors of the surgical suite swung open. A tall, slender figure stepped inside, flanked by a top-tier surgical team from the Sterling Foundation. She wore a sterile scrub suit, her hair tucked neatly under a surgical cap, a blue mask concealing the lower half of her face. Only a pair of sharp, brilliant, piercing eyes were visible. Julian scrambled to his feet, bowing repeatedly. "Professor M. Thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Vance. Well, I used to be chief of orthopedics at St. Mary's. Please, tell me how I can assist you. I'm entirely at your service." The woman didn't utter a single word to him. She didn't even turn her head. "Microscalpel," she commanded smoothly, her tone cool, commanding, and impeccably precise. "Set the laser suction to point 2. Keep the field completely clear." For the next 4 hours, Julian watched in absolute, stunned silence. Her hands moved like a master conductor, blade gliding past delicate nerve clusters, bone fragments extracted with microscopic precision, vascular clamps placed without a single drop of unnecessary blood loss. It wasn't just surgery, it was an impossible, breathtaking display of pure genius. She really is a god, Julian thought, his chest swelling with fanatical awe. If I can just earn her favor, I can rebuild my entire career. "Suture complete," she announced calmly as the vitals monitor chimed a steady, healthy rhythm. "Patient is stable. Transfer him to ICU." The surgical team exhaled in unison, breaking into quiet applause. Julian rushed forward, clutching his hands together, his face flushed with excitement. "Professor M. That was miraculous. You saved my life tonight. Please, I beg you, allow me to work under you. I'll do anything." "Who are you really?" The woman paused by the scrub sink. Slowly, casually, she reached up, untied the straps of her surgical cap, and let her dark hair cascade over her shoulders. Then, she unhooked her mask and pulled it down. Julian's smile instantly shattered. His eyes dilated to the size of pinpricks as every drop of blood drained from his face. Madeline." Julian choked out, taking a violent step back and tumbling over in 4 pole, crashing hard onto the tiled floor. You're M." Madeline stood over him, holding her mask, looking down at his pathetic, sprawling form with icy disdain. "Did you really think your precious orthopedic authority title meant anything to me, Julian?" Madeline said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that sliced through the quiet room. 3 years ago, you took credit for my draft papers to build your reputation. And all this time, you thought you were the genius in our marriage. No, this is a nightmare." Julian babbled, slapping his own cheeks in sheer denial, his voice breaking into a hysterical sob. You were just my wife. You cooked my meals. You washed my clothes. How could you be the world's top orthopedic surgeon? Because unlike you, I don't need to step on others to prove my worth, Madeline replied coldly. She tossed her surgical glove straight into the biohazard bin right beside his face. You threw away a diamond to chase a fake piece of plastic, Julian. And now, you're not even fit to hand me my scalpels. Madeline turned on her heel and walked out of the surgical suite. Behind her, Julian lay on the cold, sterile floor of the operating room, clutching his head and screaming in pure, unadulterated agony as the crushing weight of his own foolishness tore his soul to pieces. A torrential downpour battered the city, mirroring the exact stormy night 6 months ago when Madeline had been left broken on the pavement. Madeline stepped out of the Sterling Group corporate headquarters, a heavy black umbrella resting over her shoulder. Before she could reach the waiting sedan, a drenched, shivering figure scrambled out from behind the marble pillars, throwing himself flat onto the wet concrete right at her feet. It was Julian. His clothes were soaked and caked in mud, his hair plastered across his pale, sunken face. The polished, arrogant surgeon was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate shell of a man. Madeline. Please, don't walk away. Julian begged, his voice hoarse from crying. He reached out with trembling, filthy hands, desperate to grasp the hem of her coat, but drew back, terrified of dirtying her. I was wrong. I was so blind, Madeline. Please, just hit me, scream at me, do anything, just don't look at me like I'm a stranger. Madeline stopped, her boots inches from his wet fingers. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. Get up, Julian. You're embarrassing yourself. I don't care about my dignity. I don't care about anything anymore. Julian sobbed, slapping his own chest repeatedly. Every night I close my eyes, all I see is you lying in that hospital bed for 6 months while I was off being tricked by Chloe. I ruined us. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with absolute agony. I remember everything now, Madeline, he choked out. I remember how you used to wait up until 2 in the morning just to heat up dinner for me. I remember how you massaged my hands when they cramped after long surgeries. I love you. I've always loved you. Please, give me one more chance. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Madeline didn't flinch. Her voice was as cold and sharp as the rain falling around them. You don't love me, Julian, she said softly. You just love the power, the status, and the comfort I gave you. When you thought I was useless, you let me rot. Now that you know I'm an heiress and a world-class surgeon, you suddenly realize you love me. No. That's not true. Julian wept, clutching his own head. It is true, Madeline replied, stepping back. And even if it weren't, it doesn't matter. The girl who loved you died in that car crash 6 months ago. A sleek, jet-black Maybach glided to a smooth halt at the curb. The door opened, and Alexander stepped out into the rain, holding a massive umbrella. He didn't care about the storm soaking his bespoke suit, his only focus was stepping between Madeline and Julian, shielding her completely. Julian stared up at Alexander, his heartbreak twisting into a surge of frantic, pathetic envy. Sterling. Julian spat, his voice cracking. Don't pretend you care about her. She was my wife for 3 years. She loved me first. Alexander looked down at Julian like he was a stain on the sidewalk. He smoothly wrapped his arm around Madeline's waist, pulling her flush against his side, letting his warmth envelop her. You had her for 3 years, Vance, Alexander said, his low voice cutting right through the thunder. And every single day, you made her feel alone. You left her in the dark while you chased cheap flattery. Alexander leaned down slightly, his dark eyes locking onto Julian with brutal finality. You threw away gold because you were too stupid to recognize its worth. Now, she belongs to a man who would burn the world down just to keep her warm. Alexander turned Madeline around, guiding her gently into the dry, heated back seat of the luxury car. He closed the door, blocking out the storm, before looking back at Julian one last time. Don't ever come near my fiancé again, Alexander stated coldly. Or I'll make sure you don't even have a clinic floor to sleep on. The Maybach pulled away, its tires splashing rainwater directly over Julian's face. Julian lay paralyzed in the muddy gutter, watching the red taillights vanish into the night, realizing with absolute, terrifying certainty that he had lost her forever. Cornered and facing total ruin, Chloe and Julian made one last desperate, reckless gamble. Using what little money Chloe had left in a hidden account, they hired a notorious smear PR firm to launch a coordinated online smear campaign. Within hours, a heavily edited video went viral across social media. The narrative painted Madeline as a cold, unfaithful woman who had cheated on her hard-working doctor husband with billionaire Alexander Sterling, abused her mother-in-law, and allegedly staged her own car crash 6 months ago for a massive insurance payout. Public outrage flared online, with angry comments flooding every platform. Rather than issuing a standard corporate statement, Madeline and Alexander took a far more lethal approach. The very next morning at 10 o'clock, the Sterling Group and the Bennett family co-hosted a global live-streamed press conference, broadcasted directly to tens of millions of viewers worldwide. Hundreds of reporters packed the press hall as Madeline stepped up to the podium. She wore a tailored black suit, her composure absolute and unshakable. "I won't waste your time with opinions," Madeline announced into the bank of microphones, her clear voice carrying across the silent room. "I'll let undeniable evidence speak for itself." She pressed a remote control. The massive screen behind her lit up. Evidence 1, the unedited, high-definition traffic surveillance footage from the rainy night of the accident 6 months ago. The video clearly showed Chloe stepping up behind Madeline on the curb and deliberately shoving her directly into the path of an oncoming truck, followed by Chloe frantically tampering with the scene before emergency crews arrived. Gasps echoed throughout the press hall, and the live stream chat shattered into a frenzy of shock. "That wasn't an accident," Madeline stated calmly. "That was attempted murder." Evidence 2, St. Mary's Hospital's internal logs and bank statements. The documents revealed that while Madeline was in critical condition in the ICU, Julian had repeatedly refused to sign her emergency surgery consent forms, claiming he was too busy. Furthermore, he had diverted her personal medical insurance funds into a private account to buy designer handbags for Chloe. Evidence 3, full digital forensics tracking the smear campaign. The screen displayed encrypted chat logs, wire transfers, and IP addresses linking Chloe and Julian directly to the PR firm hired to fabricate the viral smear video. The live online chat exploded with millions of comments in real time. "Holy crap. Chloe literally tried to murder her. Julian let his own wife suffer in the ICU to buy his mistress purses. He's a monster. Lock them both up. This is sick." Before the reporters could even shout their questions, heavy oak doors at the back of the press hall burst open. A squad of uniformed police officers and federal agents marched down the center aisle, stopping right in front of the front row where Chloe and Julian sat trembling in horror. The lead detective pulled out 2 arrest warrants. "Chloe Bennett, you are under arrest for attempted murder, corporate fraud, and grand defamation," the detective declared sharply. He then turned his gaze to Julian. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for medical malpractice cover-up, insurance fraud, and criminal conspiracy." "No. Wait. It was all Chloe's idea." Julian screamed hysterically as the officers forced his arms behind his back, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He thrashing wildly, crying toward the stage. "Madeline. Save me. I'm your husband. Tell them it's a mistake. Get your hands off me. I'm a Bennett." Chloe shrieked, kicking and flailing as she was pinned to the floor and cuffed. Madeline stood behind the podium, watching them get dragged out in front of millions of live viewers. Her face remained serene, devoid of anger or pity. "Justice isn't always fast, Julian," Madeline said softly into the microphone as his desperate wails faded down the hall. "But it never misses." 1 year later, the city was buzzing with news of the wedding of the century. The Bennett estate grounds were transformed into a sea of red roses, overflowing with thousands of international guests, business moguls, and media outlets covering the event. Inside the state penitentiary, the common room TV was tuned to the live broadcast. Julian sat on a cold metal bench in his faded orange prison jumpsuit, staring hollowly at the screen. Beside him, Chloe sat motionless in her gray inmate attire, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. On the screen, Madeline stepped into view. She wore a custom-made, hand-embroidered white wedding gown, looking breathtakingly stunning and radiating confidence. Standing opposite her at the altar was Alexander, immaculate in a midnight black tuxedo, his eyes fixed on Madeline with a devotion so deep it bordered on reverence. A news reporter on the red carpet turned to the camera, speaking eagerly. "There has been endless speculation about when Mr. Sterling's romance with Miss Bennett truly began, given her past marriage. Let's listen into Mr. Sterling's vows." The live audio shifted to the altar. Alexander took the microphone, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the speakers and into the quiet prison room. A lot of people think I met Madeline after her divorce, Alexander said, his gaze never leaving her face. The truth is, I've loved her for 10 years. Gasps rippled through the wedding guests, and Julian froze, his eyes widening in total disbelief. 10 years ago, she saved my life in a research lab, but circumstances forced me overseas before I could tell her my name, Alexander continued, his voice softened with raw emotion. When I returned, she was already married to someone who didn't appreciate her. For 3 years, I watched from afar as she gave everything to a man who took her for granted. It broke my heart every single day. Alexander stepped closer, taking both of Madeline's hands in his. I didn't steal her away. I waited for her to realize her own worth. My love for her isn't an afterthought or a rebound, it was a decade of waiting for the moment I could finally protect her forever. In the prison room, Julian's breath hitched. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision as a wave of soul-crushing regret tore through his chest. He had spent 3 years treating Madeline like an ordinary, replaceable woman. He never knew that while he was neglecting her, the most powerful man in the country was quietly guarding her, waiting for his chance to treasure her. On the screen, Alexander sank gracefully onto one knee. He pulled out a velvet box, revealing a flawless pink diamond ring. Madeline Bennett, Alexander said, looking up at her with fierce, undivided devotion. Will you do me the honor of letting me spend the rest of my life backing you up, spoiling you, and standing between you and the rest of the world? Madeline's eyes shimmered with tears of joy. A beautiful, radiant smile broke across her face. I will, Alexander, Madeline whispered, her voice clear and sure. 1,000 times, yes. Alexander stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and pulled her into his arms, dipping her slightly as he pressed a deep, passionate kiss against her lips. The crowd erupted into wild applause, cheers, and a shower of rose petals. In the prison TV room, Julian collapsed off the bench onto the concrete floor, buried his face in his hands, and wept uncontrollably, knowing that the love he tossed away had become another man's most cherished treasure, and he would spend the rest of his life in the dark.